With the theme of an open and innovative Asia for a world of greater prosperity, the Boao Forum 2018 will officially open. It is also the first of the 4 major diplomatic events for China this year. The Boao Forum was established in the context of the Asian financial crisis at the end of last century. Now, after almost 2 decades, what new ideas can be sparked out at the forum this year? How will political leaders and business executives respond to the concerns from the new era? And what are the challenges Asia is facing at present? Today, I'm very happy to be joined here in the Boao Forum for Asia by Executive Vice President of the Institute of the Boao Forum for Asia, Mr. Yang Xiyu, and Mr. Sanjaja Baru, who is the Secretary General of the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry, to gauge this coming conference. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Welcome to Dialogue, gentlemen. Now, we run the risk of generalizing the dynamics in the region of Asian Pacific region when it comes to the competitive edge of different economies. When we try to come up with the spirit and essence of the principle that characterizes this year's of Asia Forum for Asia, why innovation and being inclusive have been highlighted?
Well, both because the inclusive and innovative are 2 key items of driving forces for the last decade's economic growth in Asia, especially both in China and India. But on the other hand, now the past experiences and knowledge of innovation and inclusive has been reached its limits. We need a new round of innovation. We need a new round of inclusive development, new model of inclusive development. So therefore, we set up the theme for the comprehensive discussion to explore new paths for the sustainable development for future of Asia.
The word innovation might be featured prominently in the context of your economic sustainability because you are known, India is known for the software industry. It has business elites and scientific research teams pretty strong in the region of Asia. So what do you think of the driving force that will prompt your economy to develop more quickly and even to catch up?
Well, you know, the problem in India is that innovation has been limited to a very small sector, software and information technology. We need to spread this out into new areas, particularly into manufacturing and into agriculture. And we have a lot to learn from what China has done in both in manufacturing and in agriculture. So broad-basing innovation, taking it to new sectors of the economy, is a huge challenge for us at the moment. And that is what I think will drive economic growth in the future. That limiting it to a small area like IT is not enough. We need to widen the scope for innovative technologies and not just be dependent on the West, but create our own indigenous technologies. This is going to be a major challenge for the next couple of decades in India.
Other than the word of innovation, being inclusive seems to be a catchphrase in our vocabulary about the dynamics of the Asian regional economic integration. Do you think, Xi, that we examine the implications of being inclusive in the context of the U.S. pullout from some of the commitments, such as TPP,
Yeah.
And therefore to enjoy co-prosperity and enjoy the spirit of a team work in this broad region will be an issue of great urgency, right?
Actually, the current economic situation and the macroeconomic policies from developed countries, especially from the U.S., really made a new type of challenges to the existing inclusive development by many means. Roughly, they launched the new trend of the so-called deglobalization by many policies. For example, now the hot topics is trade war between China, trade frictions between China and the U.S. That's one part of the deglobalization. But varied deglobalization-oriented policies from U.S. and other Western countries really have the risk to impede the sustainable inclusive development. That is why we have to focus on this topic by this annual conference, and as well wider range of exchanges to strengthen cooperation to push forward of the inclusive development, and also insist on the globalization trends for sustainable inclusive development.
I noticed his change of the wording. He first said trade war, and then he opted for trade friction instead. What do you think of his change in the attitude about what's going on between the two biggest economies, the United States and China?
Well, first let me respond to your question about inclusiveness. And you said it's becoming a catchphrase. But I think it's extremely important in all our societies in Asia for our growth process to become more socially inclusive. And I think that will happen when we focus much more on the domestic economy. So maybe the trade confrontation with the West may help us, in fact, focus much more at home on creating domestic source of growth. And I'm glad to hear the shift in the word from war to friction, because I do think that this is what we are now seeing is friction. It could develop into a war. But the fact is that the West has become increasingly dependent on us, on Asia, for its growth. And therefore, I don't think what Mr. Trump is now doing can last very long, because the Western economies require the markets that China and India and other parts of Asia are generating. The future markets of the 21st century are in Asia.
There have been speculations that the Boao Forum for Asia, though co-sponsored and supported collectively by key member states of the Asian region, it seems to only shed light on China's economy. It's the center stage of the Chinese performance. What do you think of the importance of Boao Forum for Asia for the whole region? And how do you compare Boao to the Davos Economic Forum?
Well, I think, first of all, Davos has been a forum of the Western companies. Many of us have gone there. China has participated in Davos. India has participated in Davos, mainly because we were looking for investments from the West. And that was a good place to go to bring in investments from the West. Today, as China becomes a major global investor, I think more and more countries are coming to Boao Forum because we also seek investment. We in India certainly seek more investment from China. So the importance of a forum derives from the fact that you are the source of new investment in Asia. And I think that is something which we certainly welcome. The other thing, of course, is that China has emerged as the second largest economy in the world. And therefore, naturally, Boao Forum will attract more and more participation. Asia is rising over the last quarter century and will continue to rise over the next quarter century. So forums like this will only become more important.
In June, Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping are likely to meet on the sidelines of the Qingdao SCO summit. And following the Doklam crisis last year, it seems leadership from both sides get ready to improve their bilateral relationship. What do you think of the major issues on the agenda for both sides?
I think from our point of view, there are really two issues. One, of course, is the border issue, and this has been there for a long time. And we've had ups and downs. I was in government in India at a time when Prime Minister Wen Jiabao and Prime Minister Manmohan Singh were moving very quickly on trying to resolve those differences. That has slowed down, and I'm sure Mr. Modi would like to see acceleration of a dialogue so that we, in fact, are able to address some of these border issues and prevent in future events like the Doklam crisis. But our second challenge is the trade issue. We have a huge trade deficit with China, and I know that our Commerce Minister and your Commerce Minister met recently in New Delhi, and there is movement forward. But I think by the time the two leaders meet, we would like to see some assurance of China addressing the problem of the trade deficit.
And what do you think of the alleged trade deficit that India suffers in our bilateral cooperation?
Well, let me put it by this way. Firstly, I also share the view with my Indian friends that there are two major issues. The first issue, in my view, is different from the other one. I mean, smaller than the the second one, simply because they're saying it should be the dogs wag the tails rather than the tails wag the dogs. The border disputes, the decades-long border disputes between the two great countries, are sort of tail, and the comprehensive friendship between the two great countries are dog. So we need to explore our wisdom to prevent the tail swag the dogs. So that is the very important principle for both of the countries.
We must not put our tail between the legs.
Yeah. So I believe Indian wisdom, Chinese wisdom, to solve this issue peacefully with a peaceful manner and peaceful solution. And the second issue is really complicated. I believe we'll take us through a very complicated process to rebalance of trade between the two countries. On one hand, as I mentioned earlier, both India and China commands a huge market. But on the other hand, the industrial sector, the structure of industrial sectors between the two countries are quite different. That can be either benefit or difficulties for trade expansion. But for shortcut to make a rebalance of the trade between the two countries, I think enhancement of the investment, free trade investment, I think it's a shortcut to reach the rebalance in the dynamics of the expanding the markets for both of the countries.
Thank you so much. You're watching Dialogue with Mr. Yang Xiyu and Mr. Xiaozhao Baro. We are discussing not only the current trade standoff between the United States and China, but also the theme of this year's Boao Forum for Asia. With the upcoming summit of Shanghai Cooperation Organization in Qingdao, we are also discussing issues of common concern between India and China, particularly cooperation and the confrontation, not confrontation, but competition. We'll be back in a short while. Stay with us, please. Welcome back, gentlemen. Now, there is a popular assumption, Mr. Baro, that the current trade standoff between the United States and China will benefit India, which is lurking behind the curtain, since R&D centers will be relocated from China to other low-income economies and catch-up economies. India is, of course, the most typical catch-up economy in this region, and you will enjoy more of the investment and orders from the external markets. Therefore, you'll be the winner of the trade war, right?
Well, first of all, we are also now being subject to pressure from the United States. I mean, President Trump...
Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. President Trump has come out openly saying that India is also taking away jobs from the United States, whether it's about Harley-Davidson motorcycles or other commodities. So it's not as if China is the only object. I think there's a much wider concern in the US about its decline. And my answer to my American friends is to say that you have to come to terms with the fact that there is a global rebalancing. That how do you deal with your own decline in shares? America will still remain the #1 economy in the world for some time to come. It's the richest economy in the world, but its share in global income is coming down. Its share in global trade is coming down, and that of course of China has grown steeply.
There's no way President Trump would argue vehemently he would put America first. Anything American would be prioritized by American and high Americans. Period.
It's quite understandable that in a democracy a politician would say that, and President Trump has to say to his own people, America first, to win the election, to remain in office.
And to survive the midterm elections.
And to survive the midterm election. But I'm talking of what is happening, the underlying forces of history, if you like. The underlying forces of history are Asia's rise. And in the 21st century, China first, followed by other Asian countries, and certainly India, will occupy the place that we all had 200, 300 years ago. We were the dominant economies of the world.
Let's look at China's competitive edge. Now, despite the negative impact of the trade standoff between the United States and China, do you believe our competitive edge, if any, would be seriously undermined, or you would disagree? You would say China would move ahead in the correct direction despite the painful trade standoff?
Well, I think free trade investment is fundamental policy for Chinese government in the long run. And in terms of the competitive edge, free trade investment also is a really driving force to enhancement and enlargement of the competitive capabilities for every country, for India, for China, even for the United States. In long run, protectionism for the United States would be damage U.S. competitive capacities. So I think under the current situation, on one hand, China will not surrender for Americans' pressures.
No, China would not fall on its knees. Do you think this is likely to become a zero-sum game and a bloody conflict between the two economies? What would be the worst-case scenario?
Well, firstly...
Do you think the bilateral trade will come to zero, will ground to a halt?
Although there are some very few Chinese media say we prefer going to zero.
That's the editorial of Global Times.
Oh, yeah. It's really ridiculous. I don't think any Chinese, responsible Chinese will think about that way, simply because the fact is we have been in a globalized world. And just like President Xi Jinping pointed out, we have been living in a global community with a shared future. You cannot separate your destiny with the other countries. So we have, no matter you like or not like, you have to go through the win-win result rather than following the zero-sum game.
But I'm afraid our Indian friends disagree with the Chinese position that we have a world of shared future because, for example, the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, is not accepted pleasantly by the Indian government, saying, look at the China-Pakistan economic corridor that goes through the Kashmir region, and that has caused a lot of controversies and debates between the two sides. Therefore, what do you think of the spirit of a reconciliation in our bilateral relationship, as well as whether we'll be able to move forward together, hand in hand, despite our disputes on the issue of Kashmir?
No, first of all, we are not against the Belt and Road Initiative. Our position is this is an initiative from China. It's up to China to take this initiative forward. And if it benefits India, we will certainly be happy to be part of that. But right now we see it essentially as a unilateral initiative of China, which is nothing wrong. I mean, after all, the United States had Marshall Plan for development of Europe, and China is now spending money across Asia for the development of Asia. And I don't think...
You draw a parallel comparison between Marshall Plan and China's Belt and Road Initiative. That's likely to cause consternation in the United States. They say, look at the Chinese ambition to replace the current world economic order, and that will challenge their world leadership, right?
No, I'm not looking
They'll
at
be
the
very
politics.
Nervous.
I'm not looking at the geopolitics of it. I'm looking as an economist.
But they say the Belt and Road Initiative does carry the geopolitical overtones.
Yeah, but I'm looking at...
Do you agree?
I have absolutely no idea about the geopolitics, but I can say that as an economist, I see this as China, a country that has investable surpluses, huge surpluses, looking for opportunities for investment. On the issue of Pakistan, yes, we have sensitivities. These are not just Pakistan, but even with China, we have an unresolved border issue. And any development of that region should have involved India. If there had been consultation with India, I don't think India would have had a problem.
Okay, so the Belt and Road Initiative is said to be a masterpiece by President Xi Jinping to not only help developing countries build infrastructure, but to enjoy co-prosperity. What do you think of the worries that we have from both Europe and the United States? And they say we only export overcapacity, whilst at the same time China's industrial policy is very much state-run, and it doesn't follow the WTO rules very strictly. So they complain about the inability of China, quote-unquote, to comply with the WTO rules.
Well, I think all the suspicions and worries are caused by, partly by the Cold War way of thinking, caused by zero-sum game way of thinking. But in fact, the initiative of One Belt and Road is a win-win result-oriented one, designing to build up closer connectivities in all dimensions. I think with time going, such worries or concerns will will be reduced and disappeared. Just take AIIB as an example. At the initial stage, AIIB proposal made by Xi Jinping also faced the similar, very similar suspicions. Say, China wanted to rebuild the international financial order, but with time going, years later, such voices disappeared. Just look at the AIIB. The headquarters is in China. The number one is in China, is a former Chinese governmental official. Mr. Jin Liqun, yes, your old friend. And China commands the largest share in the bank. But now nobody say China dominates the bank.
Because China has given up the veto option.
By many equal footing measures, China really effectively remove such suspicions and worries by many countries. So by the same token, the One Belt One Road initiative based on the same philosophy and the principle with AIIB. So I believe, I'm confident, such concerns that you mentioned, it's a short period phenomenon.
It seems the perceptions about the implications of China's rapid expansion worldwide has been like a curve of a roller coaster. For a while after the presentation by Mr. Xi Jinping at the opening ceremony of the Winter Davos, expectations were placed on China to assume the leadership, since President Trump is pulling out of so many global commitments. For a little while, and with the trade war to break out between the two giants, Europeans may also show their concerns about IPR violations and so on and so forth. So what do you think of the global responsibilities that a major economy such as China should assume? A European says privately, Yang Rui, why shouldn't China look at the ethnic cleansing, quote unquote, in Myanmar and Rohingya? And China should reach out to help them. At this time, a defining moment of China's soft power, China should assume the world leadership by providing the disadvantaged ethnic groups in Myanmar with the humanitarian relief. So the issue is our stakes as a major responsible stakeholder.
Well, first let me say that India is going to host the next meeting of the AIIB this year. And that shows how involved we have been in AIIB, which is a very positive thing. Going forward, in response to your question, I would say that yes, China has an important international role to play. I would not use the word China should assume leadership, because I think we are entering a world in which countries like China, European Union, United States, India, Japan, we all have to sit at the same table.
You mean we are the shareholders?
We are the shareholders. Don't forget that in 1988, 89, 90, the object of US trade sanctions was actually Japan. So I see this as a passing phase. I mean, the Super 301, Special 301, all the trade sanctions by the US were against Japan, which was actually their ally. So the Americans are always nervous about losing their share of world trade. But as I said earlier, they are getting used to the idea of a changing global power structure. And as we go forward, I think whether the issue in Myanmar or in Middle East or wherever else, China can play a very constructive role if it works with other countries. And certainly India would be very happy to work with China in ensuring political stability in the Asian region. Asia needs political stability for its own economic development.
There is no need that China should do more to be viewed as a major responsible stakeholder. Whether it's a world leader or not, that's a different issue. However, internally, I'm afraid many Chinese would disagree about the idea that we reach out to poor brothers outside, because we have millions of impoverished people in China. Although in 3 years, President Xi Jinping vows to utterly reduce all the poverty. Zero tolerance for any poverty. Not a single one should be left behind in the crusade against the poverty in our country. So what do you think of, very quickly from both of you, what do you think of the task of poverty reduction in China and in India?
I think we are in a globalized world. We cannot focus only separately focus on our domestic affairs, including the reduction of poverty. Only when we engage fully with globalized economy, then we can effectively and successfully reduce our poverty. That is one of the fundamental experiences during the past decades, since 1980s. In other words, without our openness, we cannot achieve what we have got nowadays. So we will continue. Such worries you mentioned, so we need to focus on our domestic. It's not right way of thinking.
And your take?
Well, I actually agree with that view, that we are now increasingly global economies, globalized economies, whether it's China, India, and all of Asia. But for us, the priority number one is the elimination of poverty, particularly in India, where poverty is much more than here in China. And that is why I said that India needs political stability in Asia. We want to focus on economic development. We do not want any form of political instability in the region, which is why we seek peaceful relations with China, which is why we seek peaceful relations with all our neighbors, because poverty reduction is crucial in our political system, where every 5 years there's elections, etc. Unless we address this issue, we will not be able to go forward.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. This year marks the 40th anniversary of China's reform and opening up. At the same time, most Chinese keep their fingers crossed for the economic success of our Indian friends, because their Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, is also a reform-minded politician. He's got a very ambitious agenda as well. I'll see you next time.